Okay, welcome everyone to this, our fourth episode of Late Night Writing with Enns, or SSH Writers-on-Writing, where we interview scholars, researchers, and writers across the university about their writing lives. Whether they have an obvious process to their work, what advice they can give to students who are in their field, and whether they like classical music better than grunge. I'm Enns, the SSH Writing Center Coordinator at Nazarbayev University, and with me today is Assistant Professor of Anthropology, Coil. Dr. Coil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I know that within the scope of anthropology, your specialty is archaeology. So maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about what you do there. So I know that you study how bones are broken, how bones of hominids were broken in the past, and what that can tell us about their behavior. So can you begin by letting us know, is there a particular kind of hominid that you're interested in?
My work thus far has surrounded Homo erectus, so one of our earlier members of our genus that first started to move throughout the world. But now I've joined a few projects where the focus is more on Neanderthal behavior, and at about the time where modern humans start to get into Eurasia, and we see some maybe interactions between Neanderthals and modern humans. So that's a time period I'm sort of shifting into.
Okay, all right. And can you tell us a little bit about the bones that you study? So I know that you study how bones are broken. Is there something about the way bones are broken that can tell us something about the past?
Yeah, so bones are actually very informative for a lot of different aspects of the past, including environmental sort of things. You can understand environments based on teeth, right, of different animals. You can look at the behaviors of the way animals move around based on their bones. And then, of course, we can see certain things about how animals died by looking at their bones too. And then the ways that they're broken, of course, inside of our bones, we have a very fatty, nutrient-rich substance called marrow. And that was a very great source of protein, of all sorts of different rich fats during the past. So humans were always trying to access that as we're carnivores. So some of our research is looking at basically how we can tell the difference, or if we can tell the difference between if, say, something like a hyena broke the bone, or if a human broke the bone using a stone, essentially. And we've had some varying success understanding different variables with bone breakage, but I think there's still a lot for us to learn, and we're moving into more areas of machine learning and 3D modeling that's really helping us understand maybe some of the more subtle nuances that we can't get with our manual measurements. Wow.
Okay, so then I'm guessing that once you've done your field work and you've gathered your information, then a whole different kind of task is putting that into a paper. So can we move into the more writing questions now?
Yep.
Okay. When you began writing in archaeology, anthropology, did the kind of papers that you were being exposed to, was that intuitive, that kind of writing to you?
Not at first, I don't think. I struggle a little bit to sort of adapt to because it's really formulaic, right? It's like we have a question, we have our methods, we have our analysis, the results, the conclusions, certain experiments we're running, the site that we have, the site description, background, and everything. So it took a while to sort of go into that because I didn't really, I guess, have a very defined writing style at that point. So it took quite a few years before I was able to sort of fall into that pattern of being able to, outline a paper and then go through each one of these steps and have a decent final product or a decent first draft to send to co-authors or something.
Mm-hmm. So I've sometimes heard our students say that the typical IMRAD, like the typical research paper, is really repetitive because you're saying a lot of the same things in the different sections. Did you have that feeling too?
Sometimes. I mean, obviously, results and conclusions overlap a lot when you're talking about that. But it really depends, I think, on what the paper is. Like recently, I had a few first author publications where one of them is looking specifically at a site, another one's looking specifically at some of this bone breakage research that we've been doing. And writing them up was very different, right? because on the one, you're comparing to other sites, other methodologies that other people have used to try to understand the same sort of materials. And then it's really deep into analyzing the databases, whatever we have, all of our data that we collect, and then going through the results and conclusions there. And then the other one, the experimental stuff, is more about, I guess you get to a point where it's like, well, we're seeing this, perhaps one of the reasons we're seeing this is because this is happening in our experiment, or this, or this, or this. So I think there's a little bit of freedom as far as the type of paper you're doing. If you're writing a review paper, right, it's going to be a lot different in that sense, but there's still some sort of formula you typically see when you read enough of these papers. I think that's usually how I figured out how to do it, was by reading 1,000 articles or whatever by the end of grad school.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to look at it, right? The more you read, the more that you internalize that structure. Mm-hmm. Now, it sounds to me like you do both qualitative and quantitative work. Is that so? So do you move in between the two areas? One is more narrative, one is more formulaic, formula, equation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of what I do, at least, I do a lot of geographic information systems. So looking at spatial patterning of archaeological material. So that is heavily statistical, right? Mm-hmm. So it's also heavily interpretive, because you see these patterns and you try to interpret, why we have these relationships between maybe, for instance, carnivore broken bones and carnivore bones and human bones and human tools or human created tools, that sort of thing. So I think in archaeology, of course, it's inherently, or anything in the past really, it's inherently qualitative, right? Because we have to have a little bit of creative liberty, I think, for interpreting the past. But most of what we're doing is based on analogous material from experiments or from ethnoarchaeological work, where people are going out and observing how hunter-gatherers or foragers work, or sedentary populations, how they're working. So it really is a mixture of many different things, but it really depends on what sort of subfield you're falling into and what sort of subfield you're falling into. On my end, it's more quantitative, I think, than qualitative, especially collecting data on animal bones and quantifying it, figuring out what sort of frequencies we have of different types of bones, of different surface marks on the bones, like cut marks or carnivore chew marks or something like that. So it's definitely a balance of both of these different types of approaches. Yeah,
it sounds very thick, very rich. And it sounds like then once you've sort of figured out the data, then you have to move towards an argument as to sort of saying something about the data. Sounds very, very rich. Okay, so when you were a student, was there anything in particular that made you say, I want to study anthropology? Was there a defining moment?
I kind of bounced around before I finally landed on anthropology, and most of what I took as an undergrad, as far as anthropology courses, were sociocultural anthropology classes, because we had one anthropology professor in our department at my small university in Wisconsin, and she was a sociocultural anthropologist. There was a combined archaeology and biological anthropology class. I ended up taking anatomy and physiology from the biology department, a bunch of geology courses, and I basically created my own major. But one thing that really, after sort of bouncing around from these different majors, like I started as a chem major, I was interested in physics, didn't have a major there, so I went to history, and then eventually ended up to anthropology. My anthropology professor actually said, or recommended, that I take a field school. So I go into the field for like 4 weeks and do excavation, essentially, and learn how to excavate, learn how to map archaeological sites and that sort of thing. And there I knew that's what I wanted to do for my career. So it was, I was leaning towards it before that point, but definitely after being in the field for 4 weeks, it was something I knew that I wasn't going to turn back from.
Yeah, I've heard that people, so you either love field work or you hate it. I hear that sort of dividing line. Yeah. So it sounds like you have a very sciencey background. Do you find that a lot of like the natural science students gravitate towards your courses? Do you have those students?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of my courses, at least the upper level human evolution class, is usually about 75% biology students.
Right.
My intro to biological anthropology class is usually about 50% biology students, somewhere in there, 50 to 60%, or I guess 40 to 60%, depending on the fluctuations from semester to semester. And that's, I've taught that class like 8 times already since I've been here. So that's a pretty reliable group of students that keep taking this class. So, I think it's a good balance of students from, what was SHSS and SST, but now obviously they're all together. But I think it's good for students to interact with each other too, because a lot of, upper level classes, we have more discussion and everything. And I think they're actually very good discussions, because you get some of these more, I guess, esoteric questions maybe from the social sciences, humanities side. And then you get a lot more of the, sort of finite answers, more objective answers or questions from the science side. So it's really, really cool to see actually the interaction between these, very different sort of mindsets of students.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So let's continue talking about your life as a teacher and writing specifically. So when you're looking at student papers, student assignments, is there anything in particular that annoys you? Is there something that comes up again and again that you think, drat, this again?
Excess use of quotations is one thing that really bothers me, because I always tell my students that do that, I'm more interested in what you have to say about it than you cherry picking quotes and trying to make a point that way, because you're basically bound by the quotation. You don't have any freedom to go away from it if you need to put that in your paper. So I say it's okay, if you put a quotation and afterwards, you sort of clarify what that quotation is trying to say or how it fits into the paper. But standalone quotations really irk me a lot of times.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. So I found a couple of years ago when I was researching plagiarism, I think it's at University of Calgary, they have, actually this was in their natural sciences website. They were talking about how in the natural sciences, you rarely see quotations, right? So in the social sciences and the humanities, you'll see that and maybe it's because they're doing something different with language, whereas in the natural sciences, people paraphrase, the literature reviews are paraphrased, and basically what you're doing in the research reports, if you're drawing on and you are drawing often on other people's research, you're paraphrasing what they're doing, but you don't quote. So that's interesting that you said that. Is there something, so conversely then, is there something that makes you, do a little happy dance when you're reading student papers?
When they italicize genus and species names, because that never happens. No, I mean, most people are pretty good at paraphrasing. I like when I read very well-constructed arguments that are all based on other works and other arguments, and those are paraphrased really nicely. I think that's one of the more impressive things, especially here, right? Because you have students that English isn't their first language. So I think being able to turn around something and understand it and internalize it, and then be able to put it on paper that's something uniquely your own, I think it's really great to see. Yep,
it's impressive. Yeah. Okay, now we're moving into the point where I'm going to ask you some more personal questions. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, so students want to know, did you have an embarrassing moment as a student?
As an undergrad, I didn't really talk in class at all. I sort of sat in the back and blended in. So I didn't really as an undergrad. As a graduate student, I remember very fondly in a graduate student seminar on archaeological theory that instead of saying testable hypothesis, I said testicle hypothesis.
Oh no.
And the professor was like, what? And I was just, So that was probably one of the more embarrassing things that really stands out. As an undergrad, yeah, I didn't really experience any of that. I'm sure my work was just embarrassing enough.
Did your graduate students who sat in that class with you never let you forget it for semesters after to come?
No, actually, I think they forgot right away.
Oh,
At first, and right after class, they thought it was hilarious. But
oh. It's very kind.
I think they were kind.
Oh dear, the embarrassing things that happen. Okay, now let's move into this or that. So I'm going to give you a set of two things, and you just tell us which one you prefer.
Sure.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you prefer to text message or to phone call?
Mostly text, I guess.
Okay, it's shorter, more clipped?
It depends on the context, I guess.
Okay, all right.
Generally, yeah.
Would you rather read a book or see a movie?
Movie.
Oh, okay, and you admit it. Your students are seeing this. Okay.
I read all day for work. I don't.
And finally, would you rather listen to Radiohead or Jay-Z?
If it's one of those two, I guess Jay-Z.
Oh, okay. But so if it's neither, if either of them are kind of meh, do you have a favorite band? One favorite band?
I don't know. I sort of go through a lot of phases of bands. One of my, actually, writing my dissertation, I almost exclusively listened to one album by Rancid, a punk band.
Okay.
I don't know why. It was really fast-paced and I guess
motivating
for writing. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I recognize that you have other stuff to do with your day, so I just want to say thank you so much for talking with us today and for the window into your life as an archaeologist, an academic archaeologist. We appreciate the advice and your time and hope to see you again soon, actually face-to-face at the university when the pandemic is over.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. It was fun.
Thanks.